going to give it a second and see if you guys are able to see me. I think I fixed the blur, but I'm not sure about the connection, honestly. But y'all let me know how the connection is once you guys get here. Because I think the blur was just my screen protector, which I've been having some issues with since earlier today. Let me get these glasses clean. Whew. Well, that was completely ineffective. Try something else, and then we'll get started. How is the connection for people who are already here? Is the connection good now? Let me know. Me and this hair and this car. Always so irritating. Let me lock my door. All right. I'm going to get started. I don't see any comments about the connection, but I'm going to get started. And if comments come up later about the connection, then I'll have to redo it. Although if I have to redo it, it'll probably be tomorrow. But I wanted to speak on revolutionary thoughts on what is currently in the cultural zeitgeist. And by that, I mean what's currently in the public view. And what I was saying earlier was that when we are participating in mass media, largely what we are seeing is information that we are being led to, like a feeder. And I was comparing it to when you see a mass group of people moving in one direction, and you realize that lines have been set up to feed them to go a specific way. So even though that mass group may want to move forward, lines are usually set up to make them move to where whoever controls that space wants them to move. So for me, whenever I'm participating in mass media, I understand that this is a feeder situation, that nothing happens in mass media without the nod from the forces that be, right? The powers that be. They have to give a nod for things to be able to move and to be seen and to be heard in mass media. And when it comes to social media, which they first were pretending was not mass media, they call this the algorithm, and the algorithm decides what we see. And the majority of what we see these days is either ads or situations like what we're looking at with this rap beef. We do not get to see any longer the content of people that we know or even the content of people that we follow. So it's very clear that whatever is taking up a lot of space in media is something we're being fed. So that's the first thing that I want to say. The second thing that I want to say is the root of this beef that we are watching currently is white masculinist imperialism and the leg of white masculinist imperialism that is the patriarchy. That's the root of this beef. And the reason that I'm saying that is because we all have to compete for a place in a system that was created for us to fail. Black women in particular. And again, I will say, I know that many of you guys do not consider Cardi black, and that is your prerogative. I am going to put her in this particular statement because to me she is black, but she is at the very least black adjacent. So black women in particular have to fight for a space in systems that were created to keep us out and in systems that were created to make us fail. So, the unfortunate reality of what has happened to the original African art form of hip hop is that now that it has been commercialized, it too has become a place where everyone has to fight for a space. And you're not fighting based on your merit, you're not fighting based on your skill. You're fighting for acceptance from big white male corporations. And when you have to fight for acceptance from big white male corporations, then you're going to find yourself in ugly, terrible, horrible situations. You're going to find yourself there. There's no way to fight for a space in within the white male circle and not have to do terrible things to get there and to stay there. It's not possible to do that. You have to do terrible things to be allowed in that space because everyone in that space is terrible. And it is through terribleness that they judge you. Do you want it bad enough to do anything? That's how they judge you. And we hear that all the time. How bad do you want it? What would you do for it? Do you want it bad enough to do anything? Do you want it bad enough to malign people's children? Do you want it bad enough to insult other black women? Do you want it bad enough to throw all of these kind of shots and do you want it that bad? That is what we see happening to the degree that it is happening. Now, let me tell you my relationship with hip hop so that nobody gets it misconstrued and so that nobody gets it twisted. I understand that hip hop is a sport. I was in the third grade when the first rap song hit the radios. I took the cassette home from my brothers and I learned the whole thing in one night. That is Rapper's Delight, the first one that hit the radios, the first one that we listened to popularly. So I grew up with hip hop. So I understand that the basis and the foundation of hip hop is battle rap. I am clear on that. However, what we are seeing with two people going back and forth on social media and this being thrown in our faces for the past few days, that's not battle rap. That is not what that is. Okay? And that is not black culture. And that is certainly not black female culture. The things that are being said are things that we were all raised not to say. No matter how deep the argument got, you don't go there. We were raised not to say that. We were raised to know the spiritual ramifications of saying those types of things. The things that are being done, the buttons that are being pushed, this is outside of black culture. We don't act like this. We don't talk to each other like that. So, one of the things that has happened and that we're seeing and why I'm saying that these raps are being generated by these beefs are being generated by white masculine imperialism. One of the things that has happened is that the grassroots African artistry of hip hop has been colonized. That's the root of beef like this. Actual rap beef that we can sit down and battle rap, that is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about this horrible stuff that we're looking at. The root of that is the colonization of the African art form of hip hop. The African art form of hip hop, just like the African art form of house music, was created by the reality that black musicians were kept out of white musical arenas. So many of us did not have access to instruments. Many of us did not have access to classes. Many of us did not have access to participating in these art forms and being taught about these art forms. And so, because we found ourselves outside of those particular circles and ciphers, what we did instead was we worked with what we had. So, in every black household was a turntable, a record player, right? That was in every black household. That was how we were consuming and listening to music at that time. In every black household, music was a part of how we were interacting with each other and with the things that we were doing with each other. So because that is the case and was the case, We were able to take the music that we had listened to, that our mothers and our grandmothers had played, and we began to rhyme over it. We began to talk over it. And because black households had turntables, and because some bigger black groups had speakers, then we started to have neighborhood gatherings where we were speaking over these tunes that we were used to listening to, these rhythms and these sounds that we were used to listening to, and those became battles. Because another black art form is, of course, jonesing, right? Where you go back and forth, where you swap insults back and forth. So rap battles became that. So this is a grassroots arts form that we created to include each other, to include those of us that are talented enough to do that. And when it was that, and as long as it was that, then people were being selected based on merit and skill. The one caveat to that is that, hold on one second. Okay. The one caveat to that is that, of course, the patriarchy was still very high and very heavy and very strong in hip hop, because it was very high and heavy and strong in our neighborhoods. So many times, a lot of the skillful women and femme rappers were kept out just because they weren't men. So that was happening since the beginning of hip hop, and I am not denying that. But by and large, if you had the skill, and if you were able to move the crowd, then you were in the art form and you were considered an artist in the art form. When something becomes colonized, colonialized, and commercialized, it loses that. It then becomes a thing that is under the control of a white male corporation. Once something is under the control of a white male corporation, we lose control of it. Once it is under the control of them, then you have to play by their rules. You have to play by their rules. And as history shows, their rules are dangerous. Their rules are destructive. Their rules are anti family. Their rules are anti black. Their rules are anti woman. And because they're anti woman, they're anti life as far as the life that women bring. Right? So these are the rules that you have to play by if you're going to play in this particular field now that it has been commercialized and colonialized. So then what happens is we feel ourselves to be what is the word that I'm looking for? Governed by a specific set of rules. And so we act outside of our culture, we act outside of our upbringing, we act outside of the things that we know are good for us and good for our culture and good for our upbringing, because we're so busy chasing the dollar. We're so busy chasing recognition from these white entities. We're so busy chasing a spot in their entity, in this thing that they have created. We're chasing that as opposed to chasing skill as an artist, as opposed to chasing the ability to move the crowd as an artist, as opposed to chasing cultural relevance, right? Which is what it started off as. So I understand from a revolutionary perspective that this is a pattern that we have. And this is a pattern that is naturally going to follow when you are a group that is forcibly marginalized by the dominant people and the dominant narrative, right? Dominant not because they are superior, but because they dominate through violence and destruction. So, what happens when we allow our art form to be colonized, when we allow our art forms to be commercialized, is that we then cannot have free inroads into it being fully cultural, cannot have free inroads into it being fully black, cannot have free inroads into it acting in the way that we would normally act within our own cultural enclaves. You've got to sell part of yourself out to have access to that commercialized thing, to that colonized thing. Part of you has to be sold out in order for you to do that. It's not possible for anything else to occur. So because of that, we lose our grip on what the art form is, on what battling is, on what jonesing is, on what throwing insults is. We've lost the grip on that, and we've lost the plot because we believe that this commercial level and this colonial level is the best level and that it is the only game in town. And so we got to adhere to these rules to get to where we're trying to get. And we have to use their measuring tools to decide whether or not we are worthy, whether or not we are good, whether or not we are skillful. We're using somebody else's measuring tools to determine that. What my suggestion is that whenever you find yourself in a position that is going to force you to compromise your ideals, your scruples, your upbringing, pivot. Whenever you find yourself in that position, pivot and create what actually works for you. Hip hop is the product of us pivoting and creating what actually works for us. Keep it that, right? Keep it that. And as a community, support hip hop when it is doing that. Whenever you find yourself between a rock and a hard place and in a space where you are not going to be allowed to be yourself and not going to be allowed to act and interact according to your cultural norms, pivot and create a space for you that is safe, right? We saw the rise of Nicki Minaj as a very talented and very what is the word that I would give her? Motivated rapper. But she got into those spaces because she was going to cement herself as being the only girl. And that's a dangerous place to be because you're going to have to keep playing the game in a dangerous, dirty way to keep that as true. If that is what you're basing your relevance on, you're going to have to keep playing in a dangerous, dirty way to hold on to that relevance. That's dangerous, right? That's dangerous. When we look at the rise of Cardi B, her rise was based on part of her rise was based on being the hardest, going the hardest, kind of playing the role or performing, and I know she actually is affiliated with a gang, but definitely very much performing that outside of other roles. And so when you're performing that and when that is a big part of the persona that you have sold to the public, what happens is when you are challenged, you are afraid to have a calm reaction because part of the persona that you've sold to the public is this persona of this gang affiliation, which means you have to have a big, wild, often violent reaction. So they have both tethered themselves to personas and ways of being that they probably have both outgrown, in all honesty. But because they look for validation and money and accolades from a system that does not really have a space for them, then they have to do things like this to continue to make space for themselves within that system. So, my caution to all of us is don't be afraid to wear raffia skirts. Don't be afraid to wear raffia skirts. And I made a video about this years ago, but I'm going to conclude with the story and the article that always makes me come back to that phrase. So Chinua Achebe, one of the greatest writers in the world, is a writer that happens to be from Nigeria and happens to be a member of the mighty Igbo nation, right? And he writes revolutionary work. He writes liberation literature for black people all over the world, for global Africans, right? And so he was being interviewed by a journalist from London. And she told him, "You write a lot about colonialism and the detrimental effect that it had on African people and their lives and their communities. But she said, I bet you wouldn't want to go back to wearing raffia skirts. That's what they're banking on. They're banking on us not wanting to go back to wearing raffia skirts. So we cannot be afraid of raffia skirts. And by raffia skirts, I mean we cannot be afraid of building strong, powerful, lucrative grassroots organizations. We cannot be afraid of making our community the standard of when we see ourselves as successful. We cannot be afraid of supporting the safe spaces in our own communities. Do not be afraid of wearing raffia skirts. That is my revolutionary commentary on the current rap beef. This is not actually rap beef. This is a horrible, terrible, I don't need dialogue between two people who have probably outgrown this type of dialogue. But I'm going to call it that because that's what it's being called. But this is my revolutionary commentary on that. All right. Enjoy the rest of your day. Ecstasy, abundance, and bliss to all of those within the sound of my voice who are wishing the same for me and mine. And I wish the lessons of life on those who are ignorant enough to be wishing me otherwise. I have put a link in this particular description box because tonight I am hosting a 9-night ritual for Mama Assata Shakur, because this is the 9th night since her going into the ancestral realm. And this is the ritual that we historically do and that we traditionally do to assist the spirit in its journey back to the ancestral realm. So I will be hosting that tonight. That will be live here on my channel. So I did put a link in here to the live stream if you would like to join us. And it is being hosted face to face in Nashville. It is being hosted face to face in Cincinnati, and we are hosting it face to face here in Atlanta as well. So all of that information is in the link. If you would like to join us face to face here in Atlanta, space is limited, and it is linked on my Facebook page if you would like to join face to face in Cincinnati or in Nashville. All right. Enjoy the rest of your day. Peace.